Hello, everyone. As we continue to read through the Old Testament, we're starting Exodus this week, so I wanted to share the book overview before we got too far into things. That way, we have some context and some information about what we're reading. Just like with Genesis, we're going to be hitting on the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why, or the theme of the book. Let's go ahead and get into it. Who's in the book of Exodus and who wrote it? Exodus has a few key players: Moses, his older brother Aaron, his older sister Miriam, Pharaoh, Joshua, the Israelites, and of course, God. We also meet Moses' wife and his father-in-law, but they aren't major players. As far as who wrote the book, just like with Genesis, there's some debate about whether or not Moses actually wrote the books that he's credited with. Modern scholars see Exodus's initial composition as a product of the Babylonian exile, based on earlier written and oral traditions, with final revisions in the Persian post-exilic period, roughly 6th and 5th centuries BCE. Part of the reason that most modern scholars think this is that there are some contradictions and redundancies in Exodus. Moses' father-in-law changes names from Reuel to Jethro. The mountain of revelation is Sinai in some passages and Horeb in others. The narratives of Moses on the mountain in chapters 19 and 24 have many overlapping and conflicting details, as does the account of the 9 marvels. Differences in vocabulary, style, and ideas are also discernible. Thus, Exodus is really best understood as a compositive tradition shaped over many centuries by an unknown number of anonymous storytellers and writers. So, what happens in Exodus? We actually start with a death or two. The old Pharaoh and Joseph have both died, and the new Pharaoh is a little bit nervous about the growing strength of the Israelites. So, because of his concern, he enslaves them and also orders that all Hebrew baby males be killed. Of course, he misses one, Moses. Moses is actually discovered by Pharaoh's daughter, and he is raised in the palace. He grows to be an adult, and he actually gets kicked out for murdering an Egyptian. If you're not familiar with how this happens, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because we're going to read it. Of course, after this happens and he gets kicked out, he goes to Midian, where he lives for a while, and he eventually hears God. God appears to him in the form of a burning bush and says, "Yeah, no, you're going to go back and you're going to rescue my people." So he and his brother Aaron return to Egypt. Pharaoh is, of course, not happy with any of their requests, so we get the plagues. Eventually, after losing his own son, Pharaoh releases the Israelites. Kinda. He has a change of heart and chases them down as they flee. Moses parts the Red Sea, and the Israelites pass safely along, and the sea closes up on the Egyptians giving chase. As they are wandering through Sinai Desert, the Israelites start to complain, and they run out of food and water, so they're starting to lose faith a bit. But God presents Moses with the 10 Commandments, and God also promises them the land of Canaan, saying that the Israelites are to keep the Torah, or the law and instruction, in return for that land. We also establish laws for worship, the priesthood, and a lot of the nitty-gritty. But while all of this is being established with Moses, the Israelites at the bottom of the mountain still aren't so sure about this whole going into the desert with no food or water thing. So they start worshiping a false idol, and God punishes them with a defeat from the Levites and a plague of their own. They learn their lesson and accept the covenant, building a tabernacle for Yahweh, also known as the Ark of the Covenant for you Raiders of the Lost Ark fans. So God commands Moses to send spies ahead to Canaan, and to see how hard this is going to be. The spies, having seen a lot more Canaanites than they anticipated, get a little freaked out, and they report to everyone that the people there are giants, and the Israelites then refuse to go into Canaan. God, seeing their misplaced fear, tells them that the generation that left Egypt will never enter Canaan now, and they are banished to wander the wilderness for 40 years. And they do. In that time, they gather courage and they conquer a lot of people on the way back to Canaan, and unfortunately, a lot of our key players also die. But Moses doesn't. He actually makes it all the way back to River Jordan and ascends Mount Nebo after summoning Joshua to lead the conquest of Canaan. From Mount Nebo, he dies, but not before glimpsing their promised land. So when does Exodus take place, and when was it written? There's tons of debate about this, again, just like we saw with Genesis. We're probably going to see this again repeatedly. But overall, there's scholars that say it's just a story, and there's some that give it some historical value. Most scholars accept that it's part in history, take place, and the events take place around 12th and 13th centuries BCE. Roughly the time of Ramses II and Ramses III, if you need some historical placement there. We're also referencing this article from Wikipedia, and I would really encourage you to check it out because it sums up the big arguments about the historicity of Genesis, Exodus, and a lot of the other Old Testament books. Basically, the gist of the problem is that there's not a lot of historical evidence to the events of the book. The events involve the escape of a large number of slaves, disruption of Egyptian agriculture, and the loss of many Egyptian lives, all of which is not documented, at least in Egypt. But we have to wonder if they would document such a thing because of the level of devastation and how their lifestyle and gods were called into question. Moses isn't mentioned either, though. None of our key players and even the places in the book aren't really well documented. When we get to Joshua and the conquest of Israel, the archaeological record doesn't corroborate the biblical narrative either. But what we do have is documentation of all of this from Asiatic sources. Foreigners from West Asia periodically did migrate to Egypt, mainly in times of famine. So we have those documents, and we also have some inscriptional evidence. A stela erected by the pharaoh Merneptah in circa 1209 BCE, which contains the first mention of Israel outside of the Bible. Quote, "For a people called Israel in the land of Canaan," end quote. As far as where the book of Exodus takes place, I'm going to keep referencing this BibleStudy.org map because, as you can see, it has all of the books of the Bible, and that's just really plain old useful. It's a little too general, though, so we do know that it takes place partially in Egypt, mostly in the desert and surrounding areas of Mount Sinai, and then in Canaan. But the consensus of modern scholars, of course, is that the Bible doesn't give an accurate account of the origins of the Israelites. Who'd have thunk it? They appear to have instead formed as an entity in the central highlands of Canaan in the late 2nd millennium BCE from the indigenous Canaanite culture. As far as the big why and the theme, Exodus is really actually hailed as one of the most important books of the Bible. Carol Myers, in her commentary on Exodus, hailed it as such because it presents the defining features of Israel's identity as a people. Memories of hardship, trial, and overcoming those with the help and guidance of God. Not just guidance, but a constant reminder of the binding covenant with God, who chooses Israel. The establishment of the life and community and guidelines for sustaining that community. And we also get an explanation of Yahweh and central biblical ideas about God, especially that God responds to and saves people who are suffering or oppressed. Major institutions of ancient Israel, such as prophecy, covenant, community regulation, central shrines, festivals, sacrifices, and the Sabbath, these are all grounded in the narrative of liberation of Exodus. And Exodus and the stories within it likely struck a resonant chord for Judeans experiencing defeat and exile in the 6th century BCE and later. For them, maintaining or restoring the institutions set forth in Exodus contributed largely to their emerging identity and to their very survival as a dispersed people. And with that, we conclude our brief overview of Exodus. Thank you again for checking this out, and I'd really love to know what you think. Please feel free to share your thoughts, research, comments, or anything at all with us in a message. There's the comment section here in this post, and there's also the comment section on YouTube. Just let us know what you're thinking, or maybe what you found in doing some research about the book. Thank you again, and have a great week.